Well, welcome everyone. We're very glad you're here. We have a presentation tonight, an overview of the budget by our finance director, Stephanie Sikkema. And then we're going to turn to the main part of the meeting, which is we will be welcoming of questions. But to begin, we're going to ask Stephanie to give us an overview. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you. So good evening tonight. So just to start off with a citywide perspective, the proposed budget includes revenue over $126 million of all combined funds, which includes property tax, sales tax, revenue from other agencies. Property tax still remains the city's largest revenue source and is projected to be nearly $45 million. Sales tax is the next largest revenue source and has been increasing since fiscal year 2021 and is projected to be over $23 million in the next fiscal year. On the expenditure side, total expenditures for all budgeted funds are estimated to be over $128 million. Many funds make up the total budget amount, and the largest being the general fund, which is nearly $64 million or 50% of the city's budget. Turning over to the general fund proposed budget has a net change in fund balance of over $500,000. At the end of the fiscal year, we're expected to have an ending fund balance of over $24 million, which is well over the reserve requirement of $10.8 million. This chart displays the fund balance over the past 7 years. The budget has been conservatively designed to continue to adequately maintain those reserves. Total general fund revenue are projected to be over $79 million, which is a 17.8% increase over the original budget for this fiscal year. This is largely due to an increase in property tax of over $780,000 and an increase in sales tax revenue of over $7.2 million from last year's original budget. This current year, we've seen a large rise in sales tax, which has been consistent with last fiscal year. And I believe the original budget had assumed that we would still be experiencing the downturn from the pandemic. However, we have not seen that at all. And we've actually utilized the revenue estimates from HDL as advised by our financial recovery plan and brought up those estimates to what you see before you. So on this chart, the top bar is the proposed budget for next fiscal year. Right below it is where we think we will end this fiscal year. And then the third line down, as you can see, is the original budget, which is significantly less than what we are experiencing this fiscal year. Moving over to expenditures, the general fund is projected to have expenditures of over $64 million. This is a $9 million increase from the current fiscal year budget. However, it's a decrease of nearly $6 million from the prior year. This decrease is due mainly to the UAL payment to the CalPERS as a result of the pension obligation bonds the city issued in 2020. Most of the general fund expenditures go to salary and benefits, which accumulates up to 79%. With this budget, expenditures were analyzed over all expense accounts and brought down to actual trends rather than prior year budgeted amounts. While there were increases and decreases in different line items, the overall impact was generally positive for the general fund. A significant increase was also made to salaries and benefits, primarily due to increasing overtime based on prior year actual trends. The slide here shows the trends of that overtime over the years. This year, we're projecting to be about $6.2 million, and when we add in the increases from the MOUs, just keeping it flat and adding that salary increase, we brought it to 6.4 to be more realistic with the times. The original budget had 3.2 million, but as you can see from prior year trends, that's not a realistic expectation for the service levels we're trying to provide. The majority of this overtime comes from fire and followed by police. Some changes in service levels that we incorporated into this budget is to bring recreation and community service programs back to pre-pandemic levels. We've also added funding for special events such as the Spring Festival and 4th of July. We are also planning to reissue the quarterly newsletter to inform and engage residents. We've also included funding to increase maintenance operations, specifically by upping the tree trim cycle from 7 to 5 years. And additionally, we've added $17 million in projects for the next fiscal year, which most of these are funded by special revenue fund sources, and we'll touch on a little later. The budget also includes a budget for the health department, which is estimated to be self-supported and operate as an enterprise fund. Proposed changes to staffing include the addition of 12 maintenance positions. These positions are fully funded by special revenue funds from the gas tax and sewer, so there are no general fund funding going towards these positions. And then in public safety, we're proposing to add 1 full-time non-sworn public safety position, and then 2 part-time positions in HR and planning. We also removed 1 part-time position in finance and proposed to upgrade 1 other part-time position to full-time for an overall net change of 14 new positions in the budget. The long-range financial forecast was updated in March and projected general fund budget deficits for each year in the forecast. Additionally, the general fund reserves were anticipated to be depleted to 10% or $8 million by fiscal year 2027. The forecast had recommended structural changes to increase revenues and or decrease expenditures in the future years. Thus, when we developed the budget, we put together several changes in order to incorporate those recommendations. The first of which is we removed frozen non-sworn personnel and police. These positions had been frozen for the last few years, but the financial forecast had assumed they would be filled. With the removal of those 8 positions total, that helped bring the budget into balance and helped us align in future years. We also assumed reinstatement of the false alarm program and associated revenue. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we adjusted to prior year actuals across the board, both on the revenue and the expenditure side. So this meant scrubbing expenditure accounts with budgets that may have been double or triple what they normally spend and bringing them back down to what the reality. And on the flip side, increasing others where they've always overspent the budget to what is a realistic number of what your operations should be. In addition to that, the revenue bases were raised based on the projections of sales tax. So at the beginning of March, which was really February in order to get it before council, sales tax numbers weren't fully in yet, or not in as much as we'd seen to date. And so looking at those more closely and getting with HCL, and on our quarterly meetings, we've raised those bases to what we've seen not just this fiscal year, but last fiscal year. And just raising that base alone, even with a conservative increase, brought us into a better outlook for the future years. The same can be said for transient occupancy tax and permit revenue. We are projecting some of those building permit revenue to stay consistent based on the construction we're seeing in the projects going on. However, because of that quick shift, we haven't recommended anything in the proposed budget that would be significant reoccurring obligations. So we were very conservative when we added any positions to the general fund. As you can see, we added positions to the special revenues, but when it came to the general fund, we tried to be conservative in that. Touching on the capital improvement program, the proposed CIP has over $94 million in projects. $46 million of that is currently underway from this year and prior years. The majority of that, which is funded by our Arpa or COVID recovery funds, that being about $20 million. And then next year for the proposed budget, we have about $17.7 million, which is spread across different improvements to our facilities, which are much need for upgrades, and parks, followed by streets, traffic, and sewer. Most of our funding from the CIP has come from grants, the majority of that being the Arpa funding, which you see the largest line there, which is then followed by general fund, and then we are anticipating some public-private partnerships with developers. The proposed budget schedule started off with a budget survey, which is currently still up online. and available for residents to complete. And then the long-range financial forecast was included in April for council consideration and filing. And proposed budget presentation was last night. We're now at the first budget workshop. We'll have another budget workshop on May 4th, which will be the same presentation, just open for more feedback. And then we plan to take all the feedback we get from these meetings and from the budget survey and update council on May 17th for any direction or feedback. And then we plan to take the proposed budget for council consideration for adoption on June 7th, and our fiscal year starts July 1st. One thing also new this year is the little handout you all received, which is just a little one-pager that is available also online. And in that, I do want to also point out that the budget brief that you have in your hands tonight, the proposed budget, and this presentation is all online, as well as the long-range financial forecast. So that concludes my presentation, and this opens up to questions, which we plan to be very informal with. But we do ask that because we're broadcasting this event, that we will pass around the mic so that it can be captured online as well. So with that, if there are any questions.
Thank you, Stephanie. We'll ask Maria Luisa to circulate with the microphone, if we could take them one at a time. I'm hoping people will have questions for us tonight about the budget, and we can pay attention to all of those questions directly. Anyone want to be first?
If we could just
Steve
ask.
Bennett.
Well,
Hey. Steve, can we hand you the microphone? And
You can hand it to me, or I can run and grab it, whatever you think.
okay, thanks.
Yeah, I wouldn't walk too far. You're going to be passing these around, or grab the second microphone. So I missed the first couple slides, so I'm not going to ask questions yet on that. But the question,
Happy to go back, Steve, if you like. I don't.
I maybe in a minute. I don't want to waste. Other people may ask the questions that I'll figure it all out. The biggest question that I wanted to know was health department. Did we cover that? Okay, so I'll skip that then. Oh, was it brief? Oh. So we had a title but no real discussion. So I'd like to know where we're at with the costs for the health department. If there's a slide, that would be great. Where are we at with the dollars? What's being spent? What has been spent? What the budget is? What we anticipate the budget is? Long-range financial plan on the health department? What have we spent so far? What we spent so far. And then the next question is what is the definition of a long-range financial plan for this city? Because I know it was mentioned in there, but everyone has a different opinion of what long-range is. So what is our long-range timeline?
the long-range financial plan, just to answer that one quickly while I'm pulling up the health department, is over the span of 5 years. And that is also up online as well, and that available for public to review as well. And I'm almost at the health department budget. So in terms of what we've spent to date, I don't have those numbers tonight. We've executed the public service professional agreement for the startup of the health department, and that was around $100,000, I believe. And then we're working to the next phase of that, which are both funded by Arpa funding. This budget, those are included in our CIP budget. What you see up on the screen is the proposed budget for the health department next fiscal year, and it's the operational side of it. And these figures were provided to us by our consultant who is working with us on this. So there's a page on there. That.
Okay.
And a fund, and it's going to be a separate fund. So it can be provided at any time.
Okay, so the ARPA, which is the American Rescue Plan, right? Mm-hmm. That, the way I understand it, is one-time funds that Correct. We can only use one time. It's not something that we're budgeting. So the one-time funds, what did that specifically cover?
So they're going towards the one-time startup of the health department. So everything included in the assessment of it. And I know our council goals kinds of goes in deeper with that, and I can actually pull up the council goals that outline that.
While you're doing that, I'll ask a follow-up. So the ARPA funds went through the one-time startup, and that was about how much money?
We received overall, or just for the...
Just for the health department. We got like 20 million, I think, overall, correct?
Yes, we got about 20 million overall, and we just did... Correct me if I'm wrong, we did a budget amendment recently for the next phase for the health department that includes the community health needs assessment, community health improvement plan, and feasibility study, and to prepare a memorandum of understanding or contract with other organizations for things that are being contracted out. So that's what we're kind of encompassing in the initial startup, which is what's going to be funded by ARPA. But then when we look at the regular operating, that we've included in a separate fund in itself.
Okay, so again, how much of the ARPA funds do we think we've spent so far, American Rescue Funds, on the one-time startup? Is it hundreds of thousands, millions?
We've only committed the 100,000, but we're looking at doing a change order or a proposal for the second phase, which we've included the budget for, but we haven't spent those dollars yet.
And what's that amount, just out of curiosity?
That amount, I don't know off the top of my head, but I know where I can get it actually off of here because it was included in the mid-year financial report. $500,000 was added to the budget, so we're around $600,000 for total for the health department.
So it says
that hasn't been. That's just budgeted. We haven't committed those funds in the contractual form yet.
It's just allocated right now. And PSA, I'm assuming, is not public announcements. I'm assuming. What does PSA stand for?
Professional service agreement.
Thank you. I knew it was something different than what I thought it was. So $500,000 right now out of the ARPA, the rescue plan, is going towards, well, it's $500,000 allocated, the $100,000 they've already spent. That's going basically to find out the long range or the fiscal feasibility study, correct? Is that what I'm understanding? This is going to pay for the feasibility study?
It includes the needs assessment, health improvement plan, and feasibility study, and similar studies that may be required by the Public Health Accreditation Board.
And so far, what of those things has been required by them, and what are we doing as a city? That may be a city manager question.
Well, this is in anticipation of what the California Department of Public Health will require. They are still working through CDPH, a process to have a formal application by which this city or any city could apply. And then they're going to issue emergency temporary regulations that would govern what the standards are by which you'd apply. What we're anticipating are the things that are listed here, but this is really just a best estimate based on what we've heard from them to this point. We're meeting with them about every 3 weeks. The next one is coming up in a couple more. But the main elements that are consistently anticipated are a full-fledged community health needs assessment, and then its companion document, which is the Community Health Improvement Program. There are going to be some other requirements, direct coordination with the city's disaster plans, for example, which might require that the city gets the disaster plans in shape. But it's the intention that all of those studies would be covered under this allocation. We won't know until CDPH, promulgates these regulations, issues these regulations for public vetting, and then adopts them. And then that contract will be placed on a city council agenda for their review and consideration.
Okay, so how much money have we spent so far on consulting as well?
Well, the first contract was $100,000. We were about $98,000 in it, as I recall.
And so that consulting is with who at this time? Is that
TransTech.
with TransTech? So who's the doctor that we're doing stuff? And I'm going to murder his name, so I'm just going to let you murder it for me.
Dr. Basil Vasenchark.
So are we paying him then?
No.
So we're not paying him anything.
Correct.
He's working for free
Correct.
with the hopes of probably to be something. Okay, so TransTech we've paid $100,000 for to them so far, just shy of it. Okay, I beat this one to a pulp for a moment until I come up with some other questions. I'll let someone else talk.
I wasn't clear to me when you were talking where the city is going relative to their long-range plan. It was clear in the long-range document that there's an expectation that there will be deficit spending on kind of a continuous basis for quite a few years until the reserve is depleted. Which is consistent with the past practice. The question is, I saw a slide that said that there were a few what looked like minor changes made to try to deal with that, but there didn't seem to be any overall plan to deal with the continuous deficit spending, at least not that I've seen. Is there such a plan?
Yes. So just by removing, like you said, those 8 positions that we removed from the budget, that was over $1 million there. And then raising the sales tax, because the sales tax included in the long range financial plan was significantly less. It was based on more of what we were seeing during the pandemic than what we're seeing today. And so those numbers have been raised in the current budget. So if we were to update this long range financial forecast now, we would see a different outcome.
Are you saying that the sales tax increase is enough to cover the deficit spending? That's
correct.
Was what I was trying to
Correct.
ask. Okay. That's the plan. Sales tax increase will cover it.
Well, there's also other revenue that increased, but sales tax was the majority of the increase that we're seeing.
Okay, because that sales tax, at least I don't have all the numbers in my head, but it seems to be if it is truly a $7 million increase, that's historically very high compared to everything that's happened in the past. Everything pre-pandemic, forever. And do you have an explanation on why it's so high?
So it started to go up in 2021. So we saw it decline during the height of the pandemic. But last fiscal year, it was over 20. Let me pull up that slide on here. So I'm looking at numbers instead of where's the budget? Sorry, I have so many up.
No, I'm not disputing that the number's gone up. I was trying to get at why. I remember myself getting up before the council about a year ago saying the budget was underestimating property tax and sales tax. I did that. So I knew the number was not budgeted properly a year ago. But this number that you just mentioned, $7 million, is way above what I expected, and I don't have an explanation for why it's way above. And that's what I'm really asking, why. Not that the number's gone up. That isn't the question. It's why has it gone up so much? I don't have a good understanding of that. No, why you
people are
expect the
spending
$7
more?
million? Why do you expect sales tax to increase $7 million? That's really it. Not that.
And I want to clarify, I'm not expecting it to increase by 7 million. It has increased by about 7 million. I only have a conservative increase of 1.5 on what we've already basically are getting this year. So last fiscal year, it was 20.4. This year, we're based on our current, what we've already gotten to date, we're seeing it probably hitting 22 22.8, almost 23 million just this fiscal year from what we've already seen. And that's based on actuals to date, and then me being conservative and just saying we're going to get what we got last year on the rest of the fiscal year. And so I'm only conservatively increasing a 1.5 based on the 22.8 that we're getting this year. So that's what we've seen. So I haven't increased the percentage that we're increasing it over. This is just the increase we've seen. A lot of that has been in sales and autos, and then in our, I want to say online sales, but it's the proportion that we get from online sales as well that has increased significantly in the pool.
I'm having trouble with the arithmetic. You said 7 million, but the numbers you just quoted were like 2 million.
7 million from the original budget. So the original budget, as you know, was that 15.9.
You're talking about that false budget. Okay. Got it. I'm okay. I think I understand now what happened.
My goal was to align with actual numbers this year, which, as you'll see in the budget before you, I've only included actuals, and the only time I include a budget is this current original budget from this fiscal year. But everything we used to create the budget was based on the actual year numbers.
Can we share the microphone?
I speak quite loudly. You're projecting the sales to continue up, but with inflation, won't that, the projection, even though we're last month or the month prior, and we know everybody was purchasing because we were coming out of COVID, but now with inflation going up, and interest rate, can we still speculate that the numbers will continue rising for the rest of 2021 or 2022, 2023?
We don't anticipate they'll increase at the rate they were increasing. So the dramatic increase that we saw from 2020 to 2021, going up 3 million and then 3 million again, we don't anticipate it's going to go up another 3 million. And that's why, this year, we're seeing it probably hit around 23 million. So I'm budgeting about 23 million next year. So we don't think it's going to continually increase at this rate.
In fact, it could decrease.
It could, which is, again, why we've not committed to one-time things in the budget, such as the events and other things that if it were to nosedive, okay, well, then we'll take out the events. We'll have to scale back on newsletters and things like that. But our goal was not to have layoffs.
Thank you. Yeah, I had those same concerns. I would like to go back to the health department because you are saying after we spend these $600,000 for the health department, you're saying that the health department will be self-sustaining. How do you know? Those are grants and monies that we have to apply for. First of all, you can't apply for anything until it's up and running. So we're going to have to be up and running, which is going to take more than the $600,000. And then you say we're going to apply for grants and whatever, so it will be and the money that comes in because it's up and running, like licenses or whatever it is. I don't see how you can make those projections. You can't project a grant being granted to the health department. And if you look around at other health departments, they're not getting the fundings they need. So in that case, my question is, how can you do that? And then where's the money going to come from? Thanks, Steve. I was hoping there was a money fairy or something. Yeah.
Our consultant who provided the numbers actually didn't include grant funding as one of the revenue sources. He was mainly anticipating most of it coming from licensing and permit fees. But again, these were put together by our consultant and Dr. Basil, I believe.
Yeah, and I don't have a lot of faith in Dr. Basil. I mean, as a person, he may be wonderful, and as a medical doctor, he may be incredible. But as running a health department, he's never done that. So we're relying on him because he can say that you're going to get grant money or you're going to get license fees or whatever. So I don't want to argue the point. I just want it noted that I am not in favor at all of the health department because of that, as is the whole city. And no, we haven't been able to vote. We haven't gotten any information.
We've been ignored.
We've been totally ignored as far as the health department is concerned. Okay, moving on. I have another question about the maintenance people, because we're going to be hiring like 15 more maintenance people. Don't we contract with maintenance people? Why do we need more maintenance people? I'm thinking it might be because all of our maintenance people are having to go to the new sportsplex. I don't know. Why do we need 15 more maintenance people?
Do you want to tackle that from an operational side?
The goal is to get the facilities and the city ways, rights of way, to standard, which is not the case today. We've got considerable deferred maintenance and substandard in terms of not meeting the basics. Median maintenance, weed abatement,
Yeah, why did we
trees.
go there?
I'm sorry.
Why did that happen?
During lean years, the city cut back in a number of areas, and this is in an effort to put those needed positions back. I think the city cut too far.
Right, and so we need 15 more?
I think the number's 12, but I'll take your point.
Okay.
Yeah. The thing that we see everywhere we look is that the sidewalks are broken, the trees are missing, the potholes aren't being filled timely,
Oh, yeah.
and we need to
It's
do
everywhere.
graffiti is rampant. There's some increased volume on graffiti now. At this moment, right now in the city's life, the crew isn't even able to keep up with the requests that come in on the app, let alone survey the major arterials. And it's not to standard, I guess, is the direct answer to your question. We're trying to get the city looking the way it should.
How many go to the sportsplex? How many are scheduled at the sportsplex? Dedicated to the sportsplex. How many maintenance people that we could have in the other parts of the city? We don't need to have them up there.
None of the proposed positions are going to be dedicated to the sportsplex at all because of the type of funding. They could only be used for streets and sewer maintenance.
All right, I'm not asking that, though. I'm asking how many now currently go up to are dedicated to the sportsplex.
Right now, we've got dedicated maintenance services there in two forms. We're using city laborers, city force account, and we're using contract labor. Each of those, I think the base is a couple contract maintenance workers and a couple city workers. That number fluctuates based on projects and based on demands. We run crews, and so the crews have been, of late, very busy on field maintenance, trying to get the fields back up, so that we've exceeded the base. We're way behind on maintenance at that facility as all of them.
Yeah, and how much is that facility costing us? A fortune, and it's not up to par yet, and it's only used. And it's not revenue generating. Yeah, it doesn't generate revenue. Why is it just being used for special occasions? I don't know. Yeah.
Marcia has a request too. Maybe she could be next. Bill, you go first, and then we'll pass to Marcia.
Well, the council seems eager to offload the responsibility to keep the city graffiti free to Athens, which is a tax increase when we pay the increased fees to Athens. But on the contrary, the council seems eager to pick up health department responsibilities. So we're offloading graffiti responsibility, which is a burden the city has borne forever. And what do you know? Pie in the sky. We've got this eager council wanting to pick up health department responsibilities. Have you been on the phone with the city managers of Pasadena and Long Beach, who have long experience with health departments, to see what the budget costs were for their experience? And I was a little late, but is this budget considered to have no impact next year? The health department, $600,000 is it, and there will be no other impacts, budget impacts. And also, and my second topic is, I'm just curious about the bonded indebtedness and the schedule of maturity of all the debt that the city, bond debt that the city owes. Is there a part of the budget that gives us a timeline of the maturities of all the bond debt? Those are my two questions.
So the health department budget, as we discussed before, is included in there, and that's about $400,000 there. And then there is a whole section in the budget that goes over our debt service. It starts on page 187. Oh, sorry, going the opposite direction. I want to go here. Which outlines each of our notes and what's remaining. If you group them together, yes, there's about half a dozen. So we have, just to go through them real quickly, we have the successor agency note, which is got about 7.2 left on it. 7.2 million. We have our 1996 CFT bonds, which actually will get paid off this fiscal year. And then we have our 2017 bonds. And then we have our 2006 issue, which is the Sportsplex project in itself. And then we have our 2018 bond issue, and then our 2020 pension obligation bonds. And then lastly, we have our energy efficiency loans payable note as well. And so each of these tables is included in there. And then we've also included this year's total payments as well that are coming out of the debt service fund.
Disruption in the supply.
Well, to answer your first question, our payments will stay set. So we'll still have the debt payments per the amortization schedule. Those won't change. Will we see a decline in sales tax? We could see that. And so that's why we're kind of conservative when we actually have set aside what I'll call, we've included anticipated transfer to CIP of, $800,000, I believe. And that is what we kind of are considering our cushion, if you will. If sales tax comes in and we have that excess fund balance that we talked about of $500,000, then we'll make that transfer. If it doesn't, then we won't make that transfer. So we have put some what was it, conservative or placeholders in the budget to where if revenue doesn't come in, then there's certain placeholders that we put that we wouldn't expense out or transfer out. It all depends on how people's spending is in relation to the hyperinflation. So I'm not an economist, so I can't gauge on that.
Oh, I don't want to interrupt. Can we go back to the slide about the 12 full-time maintenance positions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, my understanding to add these positions in, we took away some positions from other departments.
No, so we took away positions from PD just to balance the budget and look into future years. So those frozen positions aren't coming back. To add these 12 maintenance positions, we took them out of gas tax and sewer maintenance. So those were special revenue funds. They haven't been fully utilized in the past, so we're actually proposing to increase our usage of those, and that's how we're proposing to fund these 12 maintenance positions. So not with any general fund.
Okay. And then the one part-time position removed from finance was to make the other position full-time?
Correct.
Okay. I just needed to clarify.
So essentially the only 3 that were added to the general fund would have been the 1 public safety position and then the 2 part-time limited services positions.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, my problem is with the sportsplex. Is all the work being done by city employees or are they done by contract labor?
The question is all the work being done by either contract labor or by city forces? They're being done by both.
Okay, now if they're being done by contract labor, have you got competitive bids on for contract laborers? Because I haven't seen anything to put out contract for bids for the past and present. I haven't seen anything in the paper where you put out bids for the work up there.
The city is using a contractor that was secured via competitive bid process, and the city is rebidding that as well.
Is that the one from La Puente?
No.
Because I understand, I had something here.
See, I don't understand the question about the corporate offices of the contractor and the relevance of that. I'm trying to understand, but I don't get the point you're making.
Well, I'm making the point that apparently there's a municipal code that states that labor contracts are supposed to be put out for bids. Are they not?
The code says that, and that has been the practice of the city, which continues. Correct.
Is this what's happening up at Big League Dreams? Or, I mean, the Sportsplex?
The contractor up there is through Mariposa, and that contract is being put out to bid as we speak.
Yeah, but the other ones that for fixing it up, I know Mariposa is doing the landscaping and what have you, but the other part of it, like fixing up the fields and stuff like that. Yeah, the construction of the things. What's happening there?
When the city does projects, the city has a purchasing procedure and policy that governs how those are secured.
Because something's haywire someplace. I just don't believe what they're doing. They're doing it right, sort of thing. Because we had a new person up there, and apparently, from what I understand, or from what I got in the West Covina sports renovation project, he states that our community service coordinator states that thankfully our previous project in La Puente allowed us to form relationships with a team of professionals to allow us to form a renovation project here at the Sportsplex. What does that tell you? That tells me that this man from, I guess, must be La Puente, because he said, our previous project. I didn't know we had a previous project in La Puente. Something is wrong someplace. You guys either are not putting out bids for it, or just whatever. You know, someone has a friend, hey, need a job? Here we go. And that is not right. Something is wrong someplace. So it would be up to you to find out what is wrong, or what he's doing. Maybe he doesn't know. Maybe I believe he's a new person up there. But this was what came out, and I'll give you a copy of it so that you know.
If you would, please.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
I would like to pick up the comment that was made about the maintenance workers. There was a comment made that part of them were being funded out of the sewer fund. And this is an issue that I've been bringing up almost yearly now for quite a few years. There was a study done, I believe it's now 4 years ago, said that the city had serious sewer deficiencies and major projects were necessary to remedy those deficiencies. The major projects never seem to happen. There's been some minor projects. Each year I get up to the council, I've done this like 4 years in a row now, saying we have these huge balances in the sewer fund. We don't spend much money, yet every year we feel the need to increase the sewer fees by a significant percentage that the residents have to pay. And now we're looking to use the sewer fund balance to hire people, but we don't seem to ever who are doing daily maintenance. They're not doing major projects, so there's something wrong. And I remember specifically, this is just about a year ago with a consultant that was here. I raised the same question I'm raising now, and the consultant said, this was in public session, well, the financial reports are wrong. We're really spending all the money. Well, that's not true. You're not. So there's something wrong going on in the sewer fund, and I'm just stating it for the record because since I brought it up so many times, there's just something plain wrong. And if we have money to hire maintenance people out of it, and why aren't we doing the big project that's necessary? I mean, I can dig up that old report if nobody knows about it anymore, but there's supposed to be a major failure coming that has to be remedied.
So in addition to salaries and benefits, we do still have capital improvements that are planned for the next fiscal year and some going on this fiscal year that are outlined in our CIP. We also have a fund balance that we're sitting on that will be planned for future projects that our engineer is currently examining for as well. So
I'm just speaking.
Jim, if I
sure
try to answer from a slightly different perspective. The sewer fund balance today sits at, I believe, about $5 million, and I think that's far too low. We have two major capital projects currently under construction. They were bid, and we are replacing a lift station on Azusa Avenue, and we just approved a major emergency replacement of a 10-inch force main, which was in imminent danger of collapse. The need there is deep, and I think the maintenance crews need to be added and supplemented. when we were having that problem with the lift station project that uncovered the problem with the force main, we needed to have crews standing by with a Vector truck. We only had one. We had to hire a couple more.
I'm not
The
questioning.
sewer fund
Yeah.
is not overfunded, and we're delivering major projects right now.
Well, I was not questioning the need for the projects. I was questioning why the projects weren't happening and why the fund balance. I consider a $5 million balance a huge balance in that fund, and that was the question I asked last year. And Dave, this predates you. I asked the same question of the previous city manager. So it's. And I was told I forgot the technical name for the line that's in imminent danger of collapse, but it will be a enormous problem for the city if it collapses.
Well, that's why we're addressing it immediately. But I think it's a fair question, and I think you deserve to see the schedules and the work that's contemplated in the master plan of sewers, and I think you'll be satisfied with the approach and hopefully would ultimately agree that $5 million is not sufficient to address the problems that the city has.
Well, okay.
I know we always joke about, well, we're one step ahead of the regulatory agencies, but if you end up spraying raw sewage and we end up with regional board citations, it'll be a moment when you'll be very glad we took care of the horizontal infrastructure.
My point is it should have happened years ago.
Okay, no argument from me.
Okay. We'll go back to me for a second. So I have two topics, two questions, probably mostly directed to Stephanie. And first of all, Stephanie, thank you for putting up with a lot of the questions and taking the time. Let's talk about the Sportsplex for a minute. You mentioned the bond payments when Bill was asking about them. What is our current bond payment per year, or whatever you're broken down to up there, on the Sportsplex area? And what does that encompass? Is it just the Sportsplex? Does it include the Heights? Does it include the golf course that was supposed to be there? Give me an idea what we're working with.
I don't have the details as to what the original project encompassed. I can provide you with what our payments are. They are currently being funded by by the ROPS, so our reinforceable obligation bonds. So technically, the city we pay the payments, but we get that money back through the ROPS.
Okay, do we know what that payment is, out of curiosity?
So for 2023, for example, we're going to be paying, I have to do a little math right here, it looks like 8, and then...
So it looks like principal's 405 and interest is 445.
There's two different series right here, but
Okay.
it's the total of this line right here, which I apologize, should have had a total right here.
It looks
We
about
can-
1.3 million. Is that about right? Is that rough math? Yeah.
Oh, 5.
I passed fourth grade. The next question that I have relates to the Big League Dreams, who used to be the operator at Sportsplex, and I don't know if it's for Stephanie or Dave, so I appreciate the city manager if he wants to chime in. What was the revenue we were getting from Big League Dreams prior to the pandemic shutting everything down?
I don't know if we have a revenue schedule with us this evening, but the reason they're no longer here is they weren't paying. So we had a compound problem. We had deferred maintenance not being done, and we had lease payments not being made, which is how we got into this pickle.
Right, and I'm trying to understand the size of the pickle, if you want to call it that. The reason why I'm asking is because obviously they were making payments for a while. So I guess going back, if you're saying they weren't making payments, what was the agreement that we had with Big League Dreams for the use of the facility? What was how are we generating revenue from them? I know it's a lease, so was it based on gate revenue? Was it based on overall income? Is it a percentage? There's a lot of ways to develop a lease. So what I'm trying to find is, how do I get to that number?
Yeah.
If you don't have the revenue schedule, somebody's got to know a little bit of the details of that agreement and what it was kind of designed around.
Well, the the basic deal, and I can get you a copy of it so you can see the terms. They weren't meeting it. They weren't paying. And so they weren't using the revenue that came in from the facility use, the entry fees, the monies from the restaurant revenue, the leagues payments, all of those things. They were taking the money out of the facility, but they weren't putting any back in. And so every single thing you go up there, you point your finger, you got an opportunity to spend thousands of dollars on life safety systems, methane monitoring systems, fire extinguishing systems, roofs that leak. I keep going, you're going to start to cry. I mean, the extent of the problems up there were deep. But I can get for you and will a copy of the agreement, and you could see what they were supposed to be doing. And then when you look at the revenue that came in to see that they were not making their obligated payments, that's the difference, and that's the reason that the facility degenerated. I think they took money out, but I don't think they put anything back in.
Give me 1 second. So when you get me that, could you also get me the revenue history as well, at least for 4 or 5 years?
Sure.
Real quick. If I heard correctly, you're telling me that not only Big League Dreams was not paying or bringing the revenue to pay for things, how much responsibility were they for the location itself? Or was the city any part of that? And if that's the case, where was the inspections that needed to take place by the city so that once you had this Big League Dreams back in our hands, that we were not flabbergasted by the decline of that location? Were we inspecting it the entire time? Is that part of the contract?
Okay. I'll get you all that data, Angie. I understand your question.
Did we fail?
I heard a question. Did we fail? Oh, that was just a statement. Good evening.
Let me answer that in this way. I think the city, by making the debt service payments on the facility on the bonds, has done its portion. And I think if that facility were to standard and were up and running, there'd be enough revenue coming in to pay for the maintenance. But we're digging out of a hole now, and we're not going to dig out of it overnight. It's going to take some time. I understand you're trying to fix the blame. I hear you. And I'm spending most of my energy trying to fix the problem. Okay.
Following up on Mr. Grivich's $5 million sewer fund comments and your reply, I'm trying to understand the sewer. It sounds to me like a sinking fund, and how can you fund the hiring of maintenance workers out of that fund unless those workers are going to be exclusively working on the sewer system? Is that true? Are the workers that are hired using that sinking fund going to use 100% of their time trying to fix the sewer problems?
The finance director, correct me if I get it wrong, but we treat the sewer as an enterprise, not a sinking fund. But we assign workers to do facility maintenance, to volleyball the lines, to videotape the lines, to do emergency repairs when those become necessary. The workers that are paid out of the sewer fund are to do sewer work. That's the intention here.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought that should be, yeah.
Right.
Good evening. My name is Jefferson DeRue. I have a couple of questions, but before I share those questions, I just wanted to follow up on the time of default by big leagues in terms of maintenance and payment. Was it before the pandemic, during the pandemic? And if they were negligent in the maintenance, what responsibility does the city carry in terms of their need to oversee that they were keeping up to the contract. Sounds to me like it went to hell in a handbasket in terms of maintenance. But as far as payment or lease, how long were they not paying? Was it due to pandemic, or was it just negligence and we let it go on for just a bad renter? Does that make sense, or do I need to restate that?
Again, I think what we're trying to do here is fix the blame, and there's probably going to be some litigation, but let me answer the question if I may. They quit paying rent before the pandemic started, and that's when the city got into the landlord-tenant dispute with them over non-payment of rent. They got evicted, so to speak.
How long before the pandemic?
I can get you the dates. I don't remember them as I'm sitting here, but...
Okay. Last night... I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
I'm done.
I did not mean to interrupt you. I thought you were done.
Okay.
Last night, you prefaced your presentation by saying that we were doing a paradigm shift of sorts. We were going to go from budgeting to actual. I'm a novice at this. I come here to learn more than anything else. But what I have kind of picked up here and there is when you do actual, you have to base it on data, right? And what data do you have in terms of the Sportsplex, the health department, to include it in this budget? It seems to me that you're not following. You're having to project budgeting for these entities, correct?
Well, JD, this is 300 pages of data. It's a data document. But in terms of how this was treated this time, we had a lot of conversation with this at our audit committee. And as I recall the conversation, and the recommendation was, as regards, one of our expenditure categories is overtime. But the suggestion was we either need to better manage it and have a different approach to providing services and covering shifts and minimum manning in our safety departments, or we need to properly budget for the overtime expenditures. That's exactly what this budget does.
Was there a actual budget comparison analysis done? And what were the results?
So when we talk about budget versus actuals, prior budgets had been rollovering the budgeted amount and not looking at historically what we've spent. So in regards to prior years, we looked at the actual amounts versus what was budgeted, because what was budgeted was a projection. Now, of course, I cannot do that for the Sportsplex and Health Department because I don't have that history. So from there, we're going to have to rely on other parties. In one case, it's the consultant, and in the other, we're relying on the department to give us a gauge of what they're anticipating on spending in regards to that. I know what their salaries are going to be in terms of what that cost is going to be, and I can kind of gauge based on fees of what we saw when it was open for a period of time, what we got during those months, and kind of plan those out for full opening. But those are projections and estimates based on the data that we do have that may not be actuals from prior years.
So you're actually using both methods of budgeting. Okay. My next question has to do with the relationship of the health department, Sportsplex, in consideration of a longstanding need that the city's had, and I personally find is far more related to the COVID money as well as the pandemic itself, and that is downtown West Covina. You've invested a lot of money on the Sportsplex and money from the American Recovery on the health department. But you've spent very little, if any, on downtown West Covina. Now I understand that you're arranging for some sort of an agreement between the business owners. You're bartering some sort of agreement for the business owners to kind of pick up some of this cost. But I'm wondering, your end of the deal, that is the street and the parking lot that exists there in the downtown area, why hasn't any money been invested in that to assist the owners of the business as well as the property owners to try to offset some of the impact that they had from the COVID pandemic, which is certainly more related to funding provided by the federal government than the health department? Why have we ignored that existing problem, which is long-term as has been the sewer demand? I don't know. Maybe because English is not my primary language. I get the feeling you're not understanding me.
I'm trying. We covered a lot of ground there, so I'm going to try and respond.
Let me synthesize it for you a little bit. Why are we not investing in downtown West Covina?
Well, JD, a budget is a statement of a community's priorities. When the Recovery Act money came in this room, several of these people were present. I think you were. We had this conversation about Recovery Act. And as I recall, the answer at that moment was, I'm your city manager, so I'm recommending that the city facilities try to be brought to standard because they were in really bad shape. In fact, they still are. The city's actions to help Glendora have been ongoing. We've allowed a open air permit for people to have their businesses be outside. We've supplemented some landscaping. We're doing some repairs along the street. The most recent conversations with those owners, and it's really a thing for them to decide, is do they wish to supplement the level of service that the city provides citywide? The number one issues, as I've heard them, are safety and security. We've had problems with people camping on doorsteps. We've had problems of things we don't like to talk about, urination and defecation that aren't conducive to a healthy business climate or health generally. And I don't know yet what that answer will be, but we're in conversation with that community of people about what they choose. I don't know whether the business operators or the property owners will choose to supplement what they now get. I frankly hope they do. But that'll really be up to them. And I know a lot of people are watching it and commenting on it, but those are people that aren't being asked to consider paying. So we're going to be meeting with them again in the next couple of weeks, and we'll see what they say. I think what we're going to hear is they're not happy with the situation there and they want to try and better it. I know just today our Hope team was out there working with a homeless man that was camped in the parking lot across from the Alfaro dentist. I know just a couple days ago, one of the businesses, a real estate office on that street, had a mountain of mulch illegally dumped on his property. I mean, the problems are constant. And I think we're going to try and do better there.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. But as far as outside eatery, we were, if not the last, close to in allowing that to take place here in West Covina. Covina was out there way before us in a far greater way. So honestly, we were Johnny come late when it comes to outside eateries, to the point where business suffered greatly. And I think that's true. And as far as doing little things to improve downtown, replacing a few light bulbs that have been out is not, to me, an indication of the city putting forth a good effort in terms of showing the owners, as well as the business owners, that they will meet up to their responsibility, their fiduciary responsibility with regards to security, which you already admitted was a concern for the business owner and should be likewise for the city. We have had an increase of the homeless in that area, more so now than ever. And that's on top of the effects of the negative effects that the businesses there have undergone since the pandemic. And the city really has not stepped up to the plate to help that part of the city, but I see a great focus on recreational activities, whether it's a fundraiser at the sportsplex, which is really not the intent for that site. That site was meant to be for softball, not for carnivals or 4th of July. Not that you can't use it for that, but considering the situation as is today, where you need to upgrade and invest so much of the American Recovery Funds and other shifting of monies to try to bring those areas up to par while ignoring an area that tonight's presentation with regards to this budget workshop is really focused on the taxes that very center generates. So it is so vitally important for the city to have made that the focus rather than a health department. I don't see the relationship between a health department and downtown. If I had to rate the two in terms of relationship to the use of the COVID money, health department just wouldn't even be in the race.
Okay, so I hear you. I hear you advocating for more operational money and more capital money going to the business district.
I think you should. Actually, he is absolutely right. The people that got hurt the worst is the restaurant owners and all these mom and pop shops. They got nothing. All you did was take all the money and you put it, most of it, to the fire department. I was looking up. I said they've got probably $500,000 worth of stuff that you're buying for them. I said, you know what? There's other people besides the fire department that should be taken care of. And these people, you haven't given them nothing.
Yeah. Elsie, I hear you. I want to ask Stephanie if she can find it to put up the schedule of the Recovery Act money so you can see where that money was budgeted, properly budgeted to go. But in terms of the fire department deficiencies, it was equipment, which is manifestly not to standard.
Does it all have to be bought today?
It was stations, one of them so bad that it's being condemned and torn down. None of this was to standard. And so these were the approved priorities within the municipality's budget. And I'm actually proud of the way the city budgeted these monies. I'm not in any way ashamed of it. I think every single one of these expenditures were necessary. If you talk to the firefighters, they will tell you, as a paid professional department, we're asking them to do a paid professional job with substandard facilities and substandard equipment. It's just not right.
Well, which is true, but you're selling the maintenance department.
It's absolutely true.
Yeah, but you're selling the maintenance department, the property there. Why didn't you build the fire department wherever you're going to build it, instead of spending all this extra money you have to house them here, you have to do this sort of thing. It's costing all this extra money that could be spent on the building. I said, what you're doing is you're putting the cart before the horse.
In regards to the ARPA funding, I will note that a lot of it is restricted use to 5 main categories. The reason why you saw a lot of it go to fire, really ambulatory services, is because one of the major uses was supportive health expenditures. That's also why we were able to categorize a lot of the health department, because health assessment needs plans is specifically one of the eligible uses of that funding. In regards to the $19 million we got, $9 million of that or more has to be spent in those primary categories. Only $10 million can be spent on general municipal use. And so with that general municipal use is what we were limited to. And a lot of what you see in the fire department categories was utilizing up that $9 million that you see. Addressing the businesses is very specific in how you can do that. So you can't just give out funding and to a business there. This round of ARPA funding was very exclusive to how you can address those negative impacts. Mm-hmm. That would fall under providing government services to the extent of revenue loss, because we would be doing things that a government would normally be doing, streets and things like that. Well, the fire also provides EMS ambulatory services, so the ambulances were funded out of there, EKGs, heart rate monitors, things that were specific to the response to COVID-19. So that health department is a specific health assessment and needs to formulate a health department plan as a specific category within the ARPA funding.
Yeah, you're right. Your priority. But the priorities of resident use of facilities that are available in the city issues. Ironically, the city is dependent on for the taxes. You're telling
I appreciate the civil conversation. I really do. I welcome it. I appreciate that you're here tonight and that you're continuing to share your priorities. I can tell you.
Have I ever been uncivil to you?
I wasn't trying to say that.
Okay, I just want to check and just checking because you
wasn't trying to
with
say
that.
that.
And the inference is.
I'm enjoying the conversation. I hope you are.
Thank you.
The thing that the city has to place first is the system of care that follows when one of us calls 911. Everything else is nice to have, and that's essential to have. So when you look at this list, things like new ambulances, things like fire station repairs for $4 million, a new ladder truck. This equipment doesn't last forever, and most of it's at the end of its useful life. You'd want your frontline equipment in frontline service for about 10 years, rule of thumb. And then you can't act surprised at the end of that time and you move it into reserve status, that it's worn out. And so we're trying to manage it better by getting in front of that curve and purchasing some of this equipment before we're broken down by the side of the road. So just to repeat, from my perspective, the system of care that supports 911 is the most important thing we do. And
I agree.
I'm wholeheartedly believe that deep inside, and I'm not going to apologize for it.
And I think everyone here tonight agrees with you full-heartedly. However, I want to also say that I appreciate this budget meeting for the reason that you're at least disclosing up front that you will be adding an additional, 14 employees to this coming? 14. You're offsetting it. I mean, it's kind of offset by the 8 frozen positions. You're taking those off the books, but you're adding 14 new or thereabout new employees to the city. That has come as a disclosure in this budget meeting. However, last year, you told me, JD, where do you want me to get the money to help the police, which is also a priority like the fire department. And I walked out of here with the impression that we didn't have the money. Lo and behold, there was a follow-up meeting for approving that budget. And I think they call it 10-10-10, which basically they added, 10 employees, 10 this, 10 that. And I didn't see you jump up and say, whoa, wait a minute, we can't afford that. I just finished telling JD we don't have the money to fix the bathroom. What happened, at least in this case, and I appreciate the honesty and at least the disclosure of new employees on the last run, I was left a little bit disappointed in terms of transparency. And with that, I have to go catch a boat, so I bid everybody good night.
Happy sailing. Well, Bill, can you let Angie take a turn? She's been waiting.
Thank you. Can we go back to that chart, Stephanie, the one you had, the 1 through 5? Mm-hmm. I want to kind of understand your interpretation or the city's interpretation when it says support health expenditures. Everybody in this room would agree that but where does it say create a health department? How was that interpreted in creation of a health department?
In the interim final report, they have a list of activities that is eligible, and planning for health department activities such as health department plans and establishing health department programs is one of the specific eligible items. So these are just very, very broad categories. The actual text that goes into the implementation of these is 300 pages long that I read through. So it gets into the nitty gritty. And it is hard to actually use all of it in relation to the chunk that we have to use towards the buckets that they're considering affected to COVID-19, which is the 1, 2, 4, and 1, 2, and 4. And then I would say 5, we have set aside money in sewer that we're planning on using and have plans or funding sources in the future plans for that, as to why we didn't look for that in providing it. And so our really only open area is the $10 million that we received for the extent of revenue loss to use on government services.
Okay.
Well, all right, Bill, you're next, I promise.
Yeah, it's along the same thing, because you said first responders, we want our ambulance when something happens, an emergency. I don't see the health department serving that. I think it's going to make it worse. I don't think we're going to have the services that we have at LA County. So we are not going to have the same level of health care that we have right now. So I think it's, according to what you said, it doesn't make sense.
Okay.
It totally doesn't make sense.
Bill's turn.
Well, can we go back to the 1 to 5 again?
Sure, I didn't.
In my mind, the health department idea is pie in the sky, and it gets the priority, but the regional board and our tattered sewer system seems like reality to me. I mean, we're doing pie in the sky number 1 and ignoring the regional board and the tattered sewer system that we're talking about. Could I have some comments on that?
We are investing in the sewer system and have plans for that and funding planned out for that. So mainly we utilize the money on things that we don't have any dedicated revenue sources for. I believe that would be a fair statement, unless city manager would like to add to that.
I mean, to my mind, what we dedicated to number 1 should have gone to number 5. And the people of West Covina, I don't think they would disagree with what I just said too strenuously. And you're gonna come to there's gonna be a council meeting, and you're gonna say, well, we need to raise the fees because of our tattered sewer system, but we diverted funds to number 1 and ignored the need. Now we're in bad shape, and we need more fees. Athens needs a lot more money, and we need more money for our sewer sinking fund. So that's my comment. And what's your response?
On this topic or a different one? Okay, go ahead. Get her the mic.
Marcia.
I'm going to change the topic.
I'm going to stand over here because I'm going to have an unpopular opinion. I just want to play devil's advocate. When this was presented to us, I forgot when, last year, time has left me. I work for an agency that was a recipient of many, COVID grants. Having to put this together myself or assist on that, when this was presented, I thought it was such a smart decision. I'm not going to agree with every single line. Nobody is. But having sat through these meetings and participated with the city's finances over the years, it made sense. As soon as each line was presented, that makes sense. Especially like fire. That's been sitting on our capital projects wish list for many, many years. This is the way to do it. This is one-time money. Hey, let's help get out of this hole. So I just wanted to say But that was my opinion on it. Again, we're not going to agree on every single thing they're going to spend it on, and we can't tackle every category because it's so specific. Those rules are so specific as to what you can spend it on, and you have to make the best choice you can to tackle the categories that you can. And they review, you have to submit reporting right away as to what you're spending it on, and they're going to look at every nickel and dime. So I think, this is the least of our problems right now. But thank you.
Thank you. I will also add that the time frame for using this money is a lot more condensed than normal federal funding spending. So even when you talk about sewer projects, those can extend out a lot longer than your traditional when you get into design construction phases.
All right, I'm going to change topics. Not that I don't disagree that the health department's not needed. Let's talk about the pension obligation bonds. I think you mentioned that as one of the bonds up there. What was the total on the pension obligation bonds? And I'm sure Dave has the number off the top of his head, but it was like 200 and some million, correct?
Correct.
Unfunded liability was 204.
Right. So the unfunded liability was 204, or the bond was 204?
We're going to call it up. You could. Just give us a minute.
No worries, I understand. That's why I was waiting for everyone else to finish on the other topic, because I knew I was going to force you to flip slides.
So the total bond issue is $204 million.
How much of that $204 million went to PERS to pay off the pension obligations, the unfunded liability?
So,
Like, how many stars are in the sky? The answer is all of them.
So
The city did, in that issue, reserve to itself the last year's payment on the bonds. So the bondholders had a security, as is common in these transactions, that if the city were ever to default, it would always have in reserve 1 year's payment. But at close, the monies went immediately to CalPERS. So that same amount of pension debt was paid off at CalPERS when this new debt was taken on.
if I remember correctly, though, the unfunded liability was about 186 million at that time. So, I mean, I know we borrowed 204, and I know you're talking about holding some back, kind of like a first and last payment on a rent type thing.
Yes, sir.
Thing. But it's what I'm trying to understand is
I
what's
recall,
the numbers.
too, Steve, there was $1 million in that transaction for a new financial accounting software system or something, but almost every bit of it went directly and immediately to CalPERS.
How much of that bond went into the reserve fund? Because I know that the reserve fund is being touted right now as being propped back up to a certain number, and then the reserve fund is now being
different kind of reserve. You're talking about city general fund unallocated.
I am,
reserves.
yeah, because my understanding was some of that
specific to the pension bond.
Right. So my understanding is some of this money though came into the reserve fund for the city's general fund, fund reserves, if you want to call it.
No.
Okay, so the whole 204 million on
What's for pension?
went to pension, 100% of it, except for the first and last payment mentality.
Well, first and last, and as I recall, there was like $1 million for a capital project, which I believe
went into the CIP.
went into the CIP for the electronic financial management system.
Okay, so none of the lease revenue bond went to the city's general fund reserves.
No, sir. And the city still had a portion of its unfunded debt at CalPERS not paid off by this, which we're continuing to make separate payments as we would have made anyway to CalPERS.
I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you. So JD mentioned a few minutes ago and referred to it as the 10 plus 10 plus 10 that came up at last year's budget that honestly, Dave, I think it sideswiped you up there as well. I don't think you were prepared for that, to be very honest, based on your facial expression. But I know the city council actually just magically decided to hire 30 people last year, which that increases our pension obligations again with those 30 people. Have those 30 all been hired?
Stephanie, do you know we've hired all 30?
I don't know if all 30 of them have officially been hired. I know PD has made great strides, but some of them are still not on the streets yet. And then I know code enforcement had not hired all of theirs as of a couple of weeks ago. They're still in recruitment there, which those are part-timers, so those don't affect that.
I think the answer is not quite.
Okay, but we're still in process and they're still in this budget in the funding, because that was about a $2.5 million increase in expenditures to that budget that was supposedly balanced and then all of a sudden wasn't based on the 10-10-10. So like JD, I echo the fact that I like the transparency here of talking about the hiring of people. But again, I go back to the PERS, I go back to the pension obligation bonds or the lease revenue bonds, whatever they were when we leased our streets. But now we're building a additional PERS obligation by hiring a lot of people. So we paid off a whole bunch, and I know we're saving on an interest rate. I get the math on that. I'm follow you on that. But the reality is we haven't dug ourselves out of that hole yet, and then we're hiring a whole bunch of people again. I'm not saying we don't need people. I think there's some people we do need to hire. But my concern is as a city, about 5, 6, 7 years ago, we laid off a whole bunch of our maintenance people, our entire department. And we were going to sublet out. One of the council members up here helped that charge a little bit and said, oh yeah, we can farm it out and make, and it'll be better. And it appears that that person is now realizing that we can't farm it out. We need to have it in-house. And so my concern is the money's not really back. I know we have more in sales tax, so I'm not disagreeing with you on the revenue. My concern is there's more to it than what's there up front. And there's a lot of PERS costs, there's a lot of employee costs that as an employer you have that employees don't see other than salary. Like you pay part of their taxes, you pay a lot of their stuff, or the city does. But my concern is that it looks like we're on a hiring binge. I support some of it. I just don't think we're financially there yet. And that's my concern, is that we're going to slow down our recovery if we're indeed recovering. Because I believe the result could be bad otherwise.
Okay, I hear you.
If I may, one thing I would add, in our recent MOU negotiations with each of our bargaining units, we have worked in cost sharing for CalPERS specifically into each of those agreements. So as we move forward in hiring new employees, they will be expected to have some of that burden on themselves for our cost share. So that wasn't in prior years.
You're referring to the 3% more that they pay into their own retirement, yes, which is helping that. Okay. Do we know what that number, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Do we know that number, though, that we're going to save as a city where they're now paying more of their cost share? It's not coming out of our general fund?
I do. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it's based in our salary projections for the year and reduced by that amount.
Well, it's I don't know if it's straight line, but if they pay an additional 3%, that's 3% of payroll.
Okay. That probably gives me at least a place to look. So I know what you're saying.
But it's the kind of work that occurs at the table. I mean, I've said it many times. The employees are our biggest asset, and we're meeting and conferring in good faith at the table. So when police management brings their contribution up to 15%, it's very significant to me. When the POA brings theirs from 9 to 12, it's very significant to me.
So at this time, I've seen most of the bargaining units have made strides in that, but there's still one bargaining unit I haven't seen make that stride. Where are we at with that?
At the table.
Okay. Just curious.
No, it's a conversation that belongs there, and we're going to keep talking.
To follow up on Steve's PERS unfunded mandate question, where it was a novel idea to use the streets as collateral. What can PERS do to us if we ever go to into debtor's prison because we have our streets as collateral? I mean, for that the refinance, what risks are inherent in that situation? Having our streets as collateral if we go into debtor's prison.
The transaction was a lease revenue bond. The structure is employed by a lot of California cities when they do these kinds of bond issues. There's no security interest provided by the city that could be foreclosed upon. The city is not, in a doomsday scenario, not going to have to give the keys to its streets to someone. That's not how it's set up. It's a financing tactic. It's not a real estate pledge.
Okay, and the 10-10-10 that was just spoken of, did that bring any the existing bargaining units are all in place? That didn't bring any additional bargaining units into West Covina?
And we have the same number of bargaining units that we had before.
Yeah.
Some of them have a few more members, but
yeah,
there's no
brand
new unit. That labor is owned by the groups that we currently negotiate with.
Okay. And I have one last question, and then I'll let you guys have your evening. We can talk another time. The last thing, and I missed, like I said, a couple slides early. I know you offered to go over it, so I'm just going to ask a question that may have been covered earlier since there's kind of a lot of people have left. The overtime for the fire department's always been a problem. How are we addressing that in this budget?
It's being fully funded.
So we're, when you say fully funded, kind of explain to me what you mean by fully funded.
Well, I'll let Stephanie explain, but it's based on the historic use of the overtime account rather than some other number that we always exceeded. So if this year she's got the number at 3.1, and she's about to correct me because she's very accurate, that's what the projection is for the coming fiscal year.
With a slight increase based on what we anticipate their salaries will increase by. So I'm thinking they'll probably end the year around 3.1, so I'm projecting about 3.2. Not everybody in the fire department agrees with me on that, but when you look back in history, when you see 3.6, 3.3, 3.2, 3.1 seems like a pretty realistic number to me to plan for. Do I hope that they get that? No, but from a city standpoint, and my responsibility is to balance a budget, I want to make sure that we're considering the realistic situation that we're going to face by the end of the year. So this budget took that into account, knowing that we're probably going to be paying around over $6 million in overtime.
Okay, so in years past, and I know you were not in charge of the finances back then, so I understand. In years past, we've had a situation where they've always overdrafted the overtime, and it's usually $1 million or so, $1.5 million over. So forgive me and how this is going to sound, but the answer is to say, okay, we know we're going to overdraft it, so let's just raise the budget to that. Is that kind of the approach? Because my always understanding was when you go to a department and you tell them you need to keep under a certain amount, look, there's always things that happen, and I understand public safety is a little bit different because there's needs in certain areas. But it seems like they've constantly exceeded their budget. They've constantly exceeded their overtime budget. And now the reward is, oh, well, we'll just let you do it now, and it looks like we have a balanced budget. To me, it doesn't seem like there was ever an intent by them to maintain a budget, a true budget, what they actually set forward. And since it was always around the same amount, my concern is now that they've been rewarded with exceeding their budget. There's no guidelines, there's no repercussions, there's no controls, because it's basically, oh yeah, you've done it for years, we'll just budget it that way, and it'll look like a balanced budget, and we're good. I mean, it's probably more of a statement than a question to you, Stephanie, so I understand if you can't answer that, but Dave, I think you can understand where I'm coming from and how that looks. It looks more like a reward than it is actually getting them to maintain and follow a budget. And again, that's my concern when we talk about recovery here and the city trying to dig themselves out of a hole. You can't dig yourselves out of a hole by putting dirt back in the hole.
I think we need to look at this objectively. That level of overtime is probably not inconsistent with a fire department of this size. If we look at percentages in other independent city fire departments, I think our employees are entitled to take a sick day when they're sick, to take a vacation day that they've earned, to be off injured on duty when they're injured on duty. That means overtime because we're at minimum manning. But when we roll a pumper engine and it's got 3 men on it, we don't have any women, they fill that with overtime. To do less means we either brown out a unit or run short, which I don't think anybody wants to do. So I think it's an issue that's going to require more attention, maybe some conversations at the bargaining table, and we're there now. But as for this budget, I think it's more honest, Steve. I think it's more realistic.
And I'm not going to argue that point because honestly, the other ones I thought were, as Jim put it earlier, a little bit of a sham anyways. So I actually hope this one's more honest. And I don't disagree with you on the point that you said of they're entitled to take sick time, day off, vacation. I get that. I'm not disagreeing with that statement at all. The concern I have is when you go to a department manager, in this case it's a fire chief, and you say, here's your budget, and consistently that budget, that estimated number that they're supposed to stay under is surpassed, is not followed, then at that point, what we're doing to fix that is instead of telling them, hey, you know what, you guys aren't meeting the budget like you're supposed to and having things there, we're just going, oh, well, let's just give more money in the budget. And again, we may have more money. Maybe it works. It's possible. But again, you can't dig yourself out of a hole if you continue to put dirt back into the hole that you're digging out. And so the problem that I see is we're not solving the problem of overtime, and maybe it is bargaining table discussions, but we're not solving the problem. We're just caving to the fact that they're going to do this overtime. I honestly believe they're going to increase it even more because now they have a new threshold to go over. So again, I don't disagree. Sick time, vacation time, all the things are entitled. Every employee is. My concern is that we've rewarded a department for not staying within their means and within their budgets, when most of the other departments have. Like you go through the city and the different departments, most of them have stayed within their budgets for the most part where they could. But there's one that's always a continual problem, and the reward is, oh, well, it doesn't matter anymore. That's a concern. The way that you say our employees are our best assets, I couldn't agree more. Our staff, city staff, is amazing, right? I support our city staff in almost every aspect, for the most part. The fact that you have some that get, some that don't, I don't support all of that. I think there's some things where there's a little more equity that needs to happen, and this is one where I think it's a little lopsided. And it's just my opinion. And again, it's not a statement you have to answer or a question you have to answer. I'm just making a statement more so.
I hear you.
Just to follow up on this continued topic, the insurance industry is reporting a public health crisis that includes West Covina as well as the nation, and it seems like we're about to see a spike in fire department calls. I mean, you mentioned past history, and going back to past history, I don't think is going to inform us about the future. If the insurance industry is right, the fire department and the rescue calls, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And is this that's my hunch. And is this being planned for in the budget? If the calls in the coming fiscal year and the next, spike 10 or 20%. I mean, how many calls were there last year? And what if the activity goes up 10% next year and this fiscal year, and 10% more the following year? That I wouldn't be surprised if we. So past history isn't going to help us.
Well, we've seen through the pandemic calls for service as much as double, and it's a system of care. We've seen our guys, they call it waiting on the wall, which means they're hanging out outside their local hospital with a patient on board that they can't get into the hospital because it's over capacity. The system doesn't have enough freeboard. There's not enough margin there to accommodate those kind of surges. In terms of long-term effects, I agree we don't know yet. But we know where we've been, and we're trying to budget this year based on that. And we'll be honest about needed changes as they arise.
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if this area of the budget Is there nobody else here?
Just us.
I wouldn't be surprised if that tears a big hole in the budget this year and next year. So
Thank you for being here tonight.
I'm not a prophet, but it seems like that's a reasonable.
I hear you.
Deserves some budget consideration. Thank you. Sorry.
I'm not.